There's a specific kind of silence that doesn't feel like silence at all. It feels like a door that was once open, slowly closing. And then one day you realize it's not closing anymore. It's already shut. And somewhere on the other side of that door is a person who has made up their mind about you, who stopped chasing, who went quiet, who, from everything you can see, has moved on. And you're standing there wondering, is this really final? Did they mean it? Is there any version of this story where they come back? Today, we're going to answer that question, not with opinions, not with anecdotes, but with what psychology and neuroscience actually say about what happens inside the mind of a person who has made what they call a final decision about someone they once pursued. Because here's the first thing you need to understand. What they're calling a final decision and what's actually happening inside their brain are two very different things. Let's start where most people are too afraid to look. Their brain didn't make a logical decision about you. It made an emotional one, and then dressed it up in logic after the fact. Here's what researchers found when they put people inside brain scanners and studied what happens the moment someone decides to reject another person. The decision to stop chasing, to pull away, to go quiet, to choose distance over connection, is driven primarily by the amygdala. That's the brain's emotional alarm system, the part responsible for fear, for perceived threat, for survival instinct. Not the prefrontal cortex, not rational thought, not a calm, clear-headed cost-benefit analysis of you as a person. Their amygdala fired, and their final decision came out of that fire. What that means is that on some level, in ways they may never consciously acknowledge, their withdrawal from you felt, to their nervous system, like survival, like escape, like protection. Not from you necessarily, but from something they associated with being close to you. And that is the first thing most people miss entirely. The decision was never really about you. It was about what closeness itself felt like to them. Now here's where it gets more complicated and more fascinating. After they made that decision, their brain did something that every human brain does, and that almost no one talks about. It rewrote history. Not deliberately, not maliciously, automatically. Psychologists call this resolving cognitive dissonance, and this is what it looks like in real time. They cared about you. They may have even loved you, but they also chose to leave, to stop pursuing, to go cold, to make a decision that contradicts the warmth they genuinely felt. And the human brain cannot hold both of those truths at the same time without experiencing enormous discomfort. So it does something elegant and cruel. It edits. It starts quietly darkening the memories. The good moments become less vivid. Your flaws become more significant in retrospect. The things that annoyed them expand in their memory. The things that were beautiful about what you had together quietly fade. Research confirms that after a breakup or withdrawal, both people involved tend to blame each other, even when the objective facts don't support it. This isn't about who's right. It's about the brain protecting itself from the unbearable discomfort of loving someone and choosing to leave them at the same time. There's even a name for the specific version of this that happens in professional relationships. Researchers call it breakup dissonance. And the mechanism is the same in romantic ones. People who genuinely care about someone but choose to leave will unconsciously convince themselves they never cared that much, or that the person changed, because it makes the decision feel clean instead of complicated. So when they seem cold, when they seem certain, when they seem like they've erased you with zero effort, understand what you're actually watching. You're watching a person whose brain has constructed a narrative that makes their choice feel justified. That coldness, it's not natural. It was built. It's armor, not evidence. Now let's talk about the silence itself. Because most people think silence is simple. It's not. Psychologist Kipling Williams spent decades studying what he calls ostracism, the act of ignoring another person. and what his research found should change how you interpret every moment of quiet you've received from this person. Being ignored does not follow a flat line. It follows a three-stage descent. Stage 1. Anger and sadness. This is where most people spend all their time trying to fix things, texting, reaching out, seeking closure. This is the reactive stage, and it happens almost immediately. Stage 2. Reflection. This is where the ignored person starts asking the deeper questions. What does this silence mean? What did I do? What does this say about me? Stage 3, and this is the one no one warns you about. Resignation. Not the peaceful kind, the miserable kind. The kind that psychologists describe as alienation, hopelessness, and a creeping quiet depression. The kind that, if left unchecked, can impair your ability to think clearly and perform at the level you're capable of. In one study, simply imagining that you would end up alone in life, that persistent social silence was your future, measurably lowered people's cognitive performance. Their ability to complete complex tasks dropped. Their thinking narrowed. This is what prolonged silence from someone who matters to you actually costs. Not just the emotional pain, the cognitive one. And here's what makes it worse. Research also found that 2/3 of people have given someone the silent treatment at some point. And that phantom relationship is the standard you were silently being measured against the entire time. You weren't competing with reality. You were competing with a fiction their brain created to stay emotionally unavailable. And here is what researchers note about this pattern. The Phantom X isn't a real person anymore. It's a safe distance. It's intimacy without risk. It's love as a concept, stripped of all the vulnerability and mess that actual love requires. The person who stopped chasing you may never have been fully available, not because of anything you did or didn't do, but because part of them was already somewhere else, living in a memory of someone who never existed the way they remember. Now let's talk about what happened when you started chasing them. Because this is the part of the story that most people are living inside right now. And it is the part that is doing the most damage. Research actually backs this up in a striking way. Studies on the no-contact principle found that when someone stops chasing entirely, the person who made the final decision begins to experience something unexpected. They start questioning their own conviction. The certainty they felt starts to develop cracks. The nagging internal question, "Did I make a mistake?" gets louder in the silence, not quieter. But when you chase, you answer that question for them, and the answer you give is, "No, you were right to leave." There's also something called the sunk cost fallacy, and it only affects one person in this dynamic, and it isn't them. The sunk cost fallacy is what happens when past investment, time, emotion, effort, memory starts steering present decisions. The brain treats leaving as wasting everything that came before. So you stay in the loop. You keep reaching. You keep hoping. Not because the future looks promising, but because the past feels too significant to abandon. And here is what researchers are clear about. The person who left is not feeling this. They already made peace with the exit. The sunk cost fallacy is yours. It is costing you ground that you don't even realize you're losing. Let's get into something that will probably surprise you. Their final decision was almost certainly not made once. It was made dozens of times. Every time cognitive dissonance flared up, every time they felt a moment of doubt, a flicker of missing you, a quiet recognition that life without you was less rich than they imagined, their brain ran the same internal program again. Re-justified the exit, darkened the memories, reinforced the choice. And here is the timeline that research gives us. Right after the decision, relief, a sense of control, freedom, the emotional high of having escaped something that felt complicated. Weeks later, the reality sets in. Freedom starts to feel like its own kind of emptiness. The idea of being without you, which was once just an idea, becomes their actual daily life. And daily life has a way of revealing what the idea couldn't. Months later, what researchers describe as the grass isn't always greener effect. The comparisons begin. Not because they've changed their mind, but because their brain is doing exactly what brains do. Measuring the decision against reality. If their reality without you is genuinely better, if they're thriving, growing, alive in a way they weren't with you, then the decision calcifies. It becomes permanent not because of stubbornness, but because the evidence supports it. But if their reality without you is quieter than they expected, lonelier than they planned, less fulfilled than the freedom promised, the internal conflict gets louder, and the very certainty they projected starts to develop seams. Here's the nuance no one tells you. You can't manufacture that reckoning for them. You cannot text your way into their private accounting. The only thing that creates space for genuine reconsideration is the absence of you, not the presence of your pursuit. Let's talk about gender, because there is a real and documented difference in how men and women experience the final decision. And most conversations about this ignore it entirely. Research on 876 young adults who had recently gone through a breakup found something striking. Men were significantly more likely than women to hold on to hope, to cling to the possibility of reconnection, to think positively about someone they had lost, even after the other person had clearly moved on. Women, on the other hand, were far more likely to make what researchers described as a clean break, to focus on the negative qualities of someone who had hurt or disappointed them, to dismiss the positives and build emotional distance with deliberateness and speed. Researchers believe this reflects something deep and evolutionary. Men, unconsciously, tend to treat past partners as potential future partners, even while exploring new connections. Women tend to treat a failed relationship as data and make firm internal decisions faster. What this means practically: if a woman has made a final decision about you, the decision is likely more structurally complete than the equivalent decision from a man. Not because women are colder, but because their brain's approach to relational loss is more decisive by design. If a man has made a final decision about you, there is more likely to be ongoing internal conflict, even if the surface is perfectly calm. Even if he's told people he's done. Even if he seems unbothered. What he actually feels and what his brain is telling him to project are often two completely different things. Here's something that research discovered that almost no one in the self-help world talks about. The person who stops chasing you probably expected you to fight. Studies on breakup psychology found a consistent and striking pattern. People who initiate a withdrawal or decision to leave almost universally carry an unstated expectation that the person being left behind will pursue, will plead, will demonstrate through effort and desperation that they were worth chasing in the first place. When that expectation is met, when you pursue, it completes a familiar script. The dynamic plays out exactly as their psychology predicted, and the decision feels validated. But when that expectation is not met, when silence is met with silence, something cracks. The person who stopped chasing suddenly has no confirmation that the story they told themselves was correct. Their internal conviction, which felt iron solid, is now floating without anchor. And the human brain, in the absence of confirmation, begins to question, begins to replay, begins to feel the weight of a missed opportunity. That's not to say this guarantees anything. It doesn't. But it explains why the instinct to chase is almost always the wrong one. Not just for you, but for the dynamic you're in. Your pursuit doesn't make you seem devoted. To their psychology, in this moment, it makes you predictable. And predictable is the opposite of irreplaceable. Let's close with something important. The brain registers social rejection in the same neural region that processes physical pain. This has been demonstrated in multiple studies. Being ignored by someone you care about is not a metaphor for pain. It is, to your nervous system, literally a form of it. And chronic social rejection, not a single moment of being turned away, but the repeated ongoing experience of reaching for someone and finding nothing, does something lasting. It reshapes how your nervous system learns to interpret closeness. It teaches you, slowly and without announcement, that love equals uncertainty, that connection is inherently unstable, that to want someone is to invite hurt. And this is the damage that takes the longest to undo. Not the original decision they made, not the first silence, but the accumulation of silences, each one quietly teaching your body something it was never meant to believe about itself or about love. So what is the truth about the person who stopped chasing you and made their final decision? The truth is layered. Their decision came from their amygdala, from fear, not from clarity. Their certainty was built partly from their brain's need to resolve dissonance, not from genuine peace. The history they rewrote was self-protection, not an honest accounting. Their silence follows a predictable pattern, and the final stage of that pattern is one you don't want either of you to reach. They may have a phantom from their own past that you are always being measured against. Their decision may feel more final than it actually is, or it may be exactly as final as it appears, because their life genuinely expanded without you in it. And your pursuit, however loving, however sincere, may have been the very thing that locked the door from the inside. The most powerful thing you can do with all of this is not use it to get someone back. The most powerful thing you can do is use it to stop giving your nervous system over to a decision someone else made about themselves. Because their decision, whatever its cause, whatever its finality, was never really about who you are. It was about who they are, what their brain needed, what their fear required, what their attachment style constructed long before you ever arrived. And the version of you that keeps chasing confirmation from someone who can't give it is not the version of you that heals. The version of you that heals is the one who understands all of this and walks away from the door that is already closed. Not with bitterness, not with performance, but with the quiet knowledge that you were never the problem. You were just never their answer.